Is that better? Okay, thank you. Welcome to today's CPP. I recognise a number of people in person, and I do believe there's a few people walking down the corridor to join us in a second. And we have a number of people on Teams also. First of all, can I just remind everybody that this is a recorded session, and it's live streamed for public access now, and it's also going to be recorded for approximately a month or so's access by people in the future. Apologies, Stephen.
Okay, thanks, Chair. So apologies from Jane Morrison-Ross and Russell Griggs from SOS, but Rob Davidson's here to represent SOS. Joanna Campbell, Karen Hunter's online representing the college. Apologies from Sheena Horner, co-chair Gail McGregor. Yep, and that's it. Thank you.
Thank you. I believe John Cairns from the police just sent us notification you might have to leave at 11 o'clock, John. Is that right?
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, that's correct. Thanks.
All right. Just so everybody's aware, we've got item 8 later, which is about a forward plan. We have reserved 15 minutes or so for a conversation there. Can you be thinking during this meeting about issues and items that you might wish to bring forward into the CPP and also the leadership team's agendas going forward? Particularly those things that would give us more assurance that the objectives we've set ourselves through the LOIP, our 3 key themes, are likely to be implemented. For one area I'd like to consider is some of the infrastructure that goes to supporting our objectives. How does that work from CPP downwards into the locality teams, etc. So that might be something I'd like to explore and get more understanding of. But have a think about that so we get a chance to explore that later on the agenda. First item of business is the minutes of the meeting. And first of all, I should note, did you give apologies for Gail? She couldn't make it today. You did mention that, didn't you? Yeah, unfortunately. Okay, so draft minutes of the meeting held last December. Any items of accuracy? Any items of matters arising that aren't to be brought forward into the agenda? Everybody happy, therefore, to accept them as approved? Yeah, nods. Okay, thank you very much for that. Community Planning Action Log. Stephen, do you want to take us through that?
Yep, thanks, Chair. So just a few things to update on. The first one is on the community transport funding for a dedicated post. As previously noted, the NHS and the Council have confirmed, and I think, Rob, you have an update on behalf of SOS today, yeah?
I do, thanks, Chairman. If I may, yes, happy to advise that SOSI's SLT has had a chance to review the matter and is now in a position to commit to the funding on the same basis as the other 2 partners, which is slightly ahead of where we thought we would be, and that I trust is good news. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you very much, Rob.
Okay, the handbook, the community planning handbook, which has details of all the partnerships. It's in a draft state at the moment, with a view to getting that finalised at the end of the month, and then we can share it at the next board meeting for comment feedback. I'm catching up with Alan next week to discuss digital and a few other things linked to community planning in terms of priorities. Valerie's online, and I think she's going to come in and give a verbal update on the vaping brief.
Valerie, you ready to do that? Thank you. Come in, please.
Yeah, happy to do that. It's just to say that that's in final stages of sign-off and publication with Public Health Scotland. So it is kind of focusing on 6 areas of action that need to be taken to address the issues that we face with tobacco and vaping. So as soon as that's available, I'll send it to Stephen for circulation to community planning partner members, so that that can be used in the various forums that people are in. And I think Gail was also keen that a letter was sent to Scottish Government in support of that, so we can use that to inform that as well. So I'll pick that up in between meetings, Chair. Thanks.
Thanks very much, Valerie. Just note that John Campbell's got his hand up. John, do you want to come through?
Thanks, Chair, and good morning, everyone. Yeah, I was going to say I was getting feedback there. Just switch off your microphones if you're in the room. Yeah, I'm probably a wee bit premature at the moment. If we're still on the action log, there was something that I wanted to pick up on page 21, but if Stephen's still going through the action log, I'll wait until that appropriate moment, Chair. Thank you.
Thank you, John. Back to you, Steve.
The next update was at item 18, and we received an interesting presentation from the chair of the ADP at our last meeting. So since then, it was been confirmed that the development day, which was advised that all board members would get invited to, it's been pushed back now to the 15th of May. So perhaps pencil that in your diary, and I'll liaise with Penny on the detail. And the final update for me that's orange, just at 19. So the performance framework for the LOIP, we're doing a lot of work with Public Health Scotland on that, and I'll bring you up to speed at item 5 on the community planning update. Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Stephen. Just to note, I think item 22 as well, Nick Popkins is coming back in June. He's the chair of the partnership, Poverty and Inequalities Partnership. So that's the final action. So significant progress on the actions, most green and most turning green on the due dates that have just been reported back by Stephen for those that are amber and red. Any comments on the action log? John, do you want to come in now?
Yeah, thanks very much, Chair. Yeah, it was on page 21. It was action 20, the item 6 that we talked about, the Shared Prosperity Fund and Borderlands Place Plan. Obviously, I raised the concern that I thought the two funds were different. Reading the update or the action in green from page 21 to 22, now, I've seen most of that sort of information at various council committees. However, it's the last paragraph, within communities in place, an award of 134,000 was made to Borderlands Place Programme and the local place plans. Now, my understanding was that Borderlands was completely separate funding, and I don't think this actually answers that particular thing. So, I mean, if we're given levelling up funding that Borderlands is bidding into, which I don't see any issue with that. However, it just means it's one funding treating both levelling up and Borderlands. I don't know if we can get some clarity on that. Thanks, Chair.
Thanks very much, John. Stephen.
Thanks for that question. No, I don't have the specific detail to hand, but I'll liaise with the lead officer who provided the information and get that sent round board members as soon as possible.
That's fine, Chair. Thank you.
Thanks very much. Any other questions on the action plan update? Okay, thank you very much. Next item on the agenda is a children's rights update, and we have available to speak to us today Darren Little, who's been leading the work on the children's rights. You'll all have had a copy of the paper, which I trust that you've read through. When you've got settled, Darren, are you ready? Over to you.
Thank you, Chair. Good morning, everyone. Just to say, colleagues, that we have Fiona Payton from NHS Dumfries and Galway also joining us online. I'll just briefly speak for a moment just to set the scene around the paper. Firstly, just to recognise that the UNCRC isn't new. The UK ratified the treaty in 1989, so within Scotland itself, it's really been at the heart of policy and legislation for a number of years, particularly around our children and young people. Public bodies like the Council, like NHS, and others around the table need to publish a rights report every 3 years. And previously, Council and NHS locally have done that together. So for the periods 2020 to 2023, we repeated that approach. And as part of that process, we took account of other work that's been going on locally with young people, so 10,000 Voices, Youth Matters, etc. But following advice from our young people, we also carried out some additional bespoke engagement around children's rights with over 700 children and young people, which also informed the rights report. Last month, Council and NHS formally agreed the rights report and a number of actions for each of those respective organisations to progress moving forward. I think it's important to recognise that rights shouldn't be seen in isolation. You know, the rights agenda very much connects with everything that we're trying to do for our children and young people across the promise around GIRFEC in terms of keeping them safe. And I suppose in terms of a more recent development, in January we've seen the UNCRC Incorporation Act receive royal assent. So moving forward as well, another development will be when the legislation comes into force later this year, children and young people will also be able to hold public bodies such as the Council, Health and others to account when we're not meeting their rights. So in summary, today was really about providing you with an update in terms of the rights report that we've published, but also to check in and see if there's any other work across the community planning partnership and possibly areas where we could connect and collaborate. Happy to take any questions. Chair, if it's okay, I'll maybe invite Fiona to see if there's anything that she'd like to add. Thank you.
Thank you, Fiona. Do you want to come in?
Yeah, thanks, Darren. Thanks, Chair. Yeah, we've been speaking within the NHS board around about taking our actions forward as well, and we are planning with Mark Kelly, our new nurse director, who the lead for that will be within the board. So those are early discussions that are taking place at the moment. However, as Darren's already mentioned, it's been approved at the board meeting a couple of weeks ago.
Thanks very much. Now, something getting to a bit of a conversation with our partners, the main focus of the report as written has been with the NHS and the local authority, but clearly the Act is relevant to all public bodies, and I would assume non-public bodies should take into consideration the Act as well. So what we'd like to do is just wonder whether other partners have any considerations they'd like to bring to this conversation now, but even if not now, whether there's an opportunity for us when we develop the next report to start to bring in evidence from other public bodies. I think that's what you're asking, Darren, is that right? John Cairns.
Thanks, Chair. Thanks, Darren. No, more than happy to have that conversation with Darren around about the report now and also future collaborative opportunities. It's certainly something that we would be keen in V Division to participate in. And then that forward-facing part as well, around about 23 to 26, absolutely committed to that. So my plea, Chair, would be that through Darren as a point of contact to see how we can get involved in that work and influence things going forward. Thank you.
Thanks very much, John. And John Duggan.
Thanks very much. I think that conversation should happen, and I think that might be an opportunity for us all to continue be around the table. A question regarding children and accessing services and waiting lists. I'm wondering, waiting times, I'm wondering if that might be an impact on their rights and how we as partners can work to make sure that that is dealt with, and you know, if they're needing to get some specialist support, then that support is there rather than having to wait potentially quite a lengthy time that then has an impact on not just their mental health, but employer or school or family. You know, so I would be hoping that we can maybe look at that as an issue for us to move forward.
Thanks very much, John. Darren, do you want to comment on that?
Thank you, Chair. In terms of waiting times, I suppose I would maybe make a distinction between waiting times for diagnosis and waiting times for support, because of course as a partnership, our position would be that we would seek to provide support to our children and young people as needs arise, regardless of diagnosis. So again, there is an opportunity for us to certainly have a discussion as part of this activity moving forward. So happy to take that on board, John. Thank you. I don't know if Fiona would like to comment as well, Chair. Sorry. Thank you.
Fiona, come in if you wish, please.
Yeah, I mean, I think with the UNCRC incorporation, we are looking at the absolute wider influence of, children and their rights within our organisations, and absolutely ensuring that they get the right help at the right time, the right place is fully through our GIRFEC ways of working. And absolutely, John, that's something that we are, currently working on and sort of developing the support around children and families whilst they are on waiting lists.
Thanks, Fiona. I'd support John Duggan's approach to this in the sense that it feels to me just intuitively that children suffering significant waiting times to get access to services potentially impacts on their development and their ability to thrive as adults in the future. So a focus on ensuring that we can ensure that they access services as early as possible clearly is important to all of us. I know we take that seriously anyway, but I'm assuming that the conversation will take place through the leadership group first and then come back to CPP at some point. Now I've got contributions that want to come in from Rob Davidson, then Alan Webb, and then I've got other hands up as well. So Rob first.
Yeah, thank you, Chairman. I think yes, just to echo the interest and enthusiasm in having that conversation that's been outlined, and perhaps a useful starting point in that would be with my colleague Melissa, who's done a lot of the work in developing our youth advisory forum. So very happy to take that away and facilitate that as a starting point for that conversation from our perspective. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you very much, Rob. And over to Alan Webb. Did you have your hand up?
Good morning, thank you, Chair. 2 points. I think in terms of a public duty, obviously sits with most statutory services in terms of considering and reporting on rights of children. I think there's an important part of the Act that needs to be considered in this partnership, which is about the level of involvement that children and young people have in the design of any intervention and service, which is wider than just consultation, so more of a point to make. The second, I suppose, is on third sector, and although they're not specifically mentioned and have a duty through any of the incorporation of the Act, the level of engagement with children and young people in a third sector is significant, and I think there's a really focused area of work through children's planning, for example, but also in the wider partnership. Firstly, about how we recognise what that intervention looks like and recognise that in a more formal way, but also what support we might give across the sector in the implementation of the promise and other national policies around whole family support, and what we might do through the partnership to enable the wider third sector to support children's rights too.
Thanks very much, Alan. Linda Dorwood.
Good morning, Chair. Thank you, and thank you for the report, Darren. It's really interesting. Just an added bit about looked after children, if I may. At the full council, the Fleece and Galloway Council full council in December 23, the Fleece and Galloway Council agreed to add care experience as a protected characteristic into our Equalities Impact Assessments. And at that point in time, we formally called upon RSLs, the Fleece and Galloway Health Board and Integration Joint Board to consider doing the same. I'm just wondering if there's any update on that. Thank you.
Thanks, Linda. Now, I'm not sure who we should go to for that update, but Linda, your hand's still up. Did you want to come back in? No?
Lexi hand.
Did we capture Linda's question properly then? Linda, can you just repeat it, please? We're just not quite sure we captured exactly what you were asking.
Not a problem,
yeah.
Chair. So at the December 23 full council meeting of Dumfries and Galloway Council, a motion was put forward and the council agreed to add care experienced children as a protected characteristic into Equalities Impact Assessment. That isn't officially a protected characteristic at the moment. So what I'm asking is at that meeting, we formally called upon RSLs, Registered Social Landlords, NHS Dumfries and Galloway and the IGB to treat care experience as a protected characteristic until such time as it may be introduced by legislation. I'm just asking if there's been any update on that. Thank you very much, Chair.
Thanks very much, Linda, for clarifying that. Dawn, do you want to come in, please?
Thank you, Chair, and thank you, Councillor Dorwood, for the question. And you'll recall that the discussion for the full council and the youth council was really productive, really positive discussion, and a number of outcomes and actions and follow-up emerged from that discussion, including the one that you've highlighted this morning. What I'm unclear about at this point is whether that has been shared and that outcome has been communicated to colleagues and, you know, the officers, the council officers involved in that work obviously are not part of this meeting. So I will take that away and have that conversation, and I will, you know, personally link with the organisations that were referenced in that meeting in December. There may have been communication, but I'm unclear as to whether that has progressed in the timescale that we've had. Thank you, Councillor Dorwood. Thank you, Chair.
Thanks, Dawn. Fiona, I don't want to put you on the spot, but we can always come back to this for information at a future point. But do you know if the NHS specifically has done any work when it's doing its equality impact assessments that might bring the care experienced children into focus with this Act?
Not that I'm aware of in relation to what Councillor Dorwood has mentioned from the 23rd of December. No, I don't have any awareness of that.
So further to what Dawn suggested, and Fiona's, what we'll do is go do some work behind the scenes to just check the what's been taking place in the last couple of months since the council had that motion put forward to it in December. Okay. Thank you very much. Valerie did have a hand up, but it's gone down again. If you want to come in, Val, please feel free to do so. No, okay. Darren, anything else you want to say before we conclude?
Thank you, Chair. I would just put to you all that, of course, a very important partner in this work, as members have discussed, is our children and young people. And we've committed to having a fresh conversation with the new Youth Council about how they wish to be part of this work moving forward, because we were, in terms of the preparation of our rights report, it was very much with the previous Youth Council, so we need to take the time to develop that shared approach, which we will do so, and of course involve the partners that we've discussed today as we move forward. So thank you very much.
Thank you. Just to note in the chat, Shona Mitchell from Skills Development Scotland has also committed to doing some work behind the scenes on this work and working in collaboration with the leadership team. So that's helpful to note. And Linda, very happy that we take this forward for you. Okay, any other further comments on the Children's Rights Report? So we wish to note the details in the report. Sorry. John, you want to come in?
Thanks very much. I think just following on from Darren's comment on the Youth Council, I wonder whether then it would be worth, when we meet with them as a Community Planning Partnership Board, that we actually spend some time looking at this whole area. I'm not sure, I can't get to the diary of meetings, but I think it's quite soon that we're due to meet with them. It might be a good opportunity then to use some of that time of that meeting to actually make progress and keep going.
Yeah, very good suggestion, John. And if I'm correct, the 10,000 Voices, we're one of the few local authority areas that it's still progressing with an ongoing 10,000 Voices conversation, aren't we? And we've had 2 of those conversations now, and it would be worth checking whether themes around children's rights are picked up adequately through those conversations, or what the children's voice would say about their rights. Okay, happy with those actions taken forward? So we note the rights report as attached and appended. We've had a bit of a conversation, which we'll take forward as well to other forums, about contributions from other partners into this, certainly into the next iteration, the 2023-26 report. And clearly, if everybody can note, the UNCR Scotland Act is going to come into force July this year. Any further points? No. Okay. Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Darren. You're free to move. And thank you, Fiona, for coming along to the meeting too. Much appreciated. Okay, item 4 on the agenda is a substantive conversation about the workforce summit, and the links to the LOIP and the next steps. And I believe we have Lynn Burgess available to do a formal presentation to us, and then we'll get into a conversation about the outcome of that. Lynn, over to you. Sorry, we're just checking that Lynn's on the call at the moment. Hello, Lynn. Lynn Burgess, welcome to the CPP this morning. Much appreciate your attendance. We were just coming on to your item, and we're just giving a little bit of an introduction just to say that you're going to go through a presentation to the CPP about workforce, the Workforce Summit, links to the LOIP, and then a conversation about next steps. So if you're ready to go, over to you.
Thank you very much. Can everybody hear me okay? Sorry, I'm a little bit behind. I was planning to join at 10:30, thinking the time was 11:15. So thank you for your time. If we can move on to the first slide, and I'm looking to update you today on the Workforce Skills Action Plan that came out of the summit, but I thought it would be good just to set that into the wider local and indeed the national context of employment and skills support generally. So I'm going to run through 3 or 4 slides summarising the output from the summit, which was some time ago. So more detailed information has been circulated previously, but I just thought it would be good to remind ourselves of some of the reasons for the action plan. So on the first slide here, we've got some of the challenges, which are both process related, kind of application issues, issues around the perceptions and stereotyping of people who are applying for jobs, and then those kind of external contextual structural issues, if you like, transport, housing and childcare, although I know it's not on there, it's always one that comes up. One of the other things we looked at during the summit was around what works, what good looks like. We have some good strengths in the region, notably around how well we work together. Our great success in the collaborative implementation of the Kickstart programme. And then some of the things that were welcomed were the changes in working patterns, and noted that Dumfries and Galloway generally is a very welcoming region. If we can move on to the next slide. So the top 3 actions that came out of the Workforce Summit. Sorry, I'll just move my own slides on. I can't see the screen properly. So the top 3 actions, I won't read them out fully, but broadly they were around work experience, increased offer of meaningful work experience, better support around recruitment, and better job matching. We also took some feedback from delegates on if you could change one thing, what's the one thing that you would tackle, and transport came up as the number 1 thing that was agreed. But you'll see when we go forward to look at the actions, we agreed that that was out of scope for a workforce skills action plan, although it's a significant structural barrier. Moving on to a little bit more detail on what good looks like on the next slide, please. So trying to understand exactly our vision of what success would look like. That was mainly focused on those key sectors where we have opportunities. Clearer skills pathways into those sectors, looking at fair work and increasing understanding of how to create genuine equality of opportunity within employment. So my final slide, just summarising then on the output. The next slide, please. Thank you. So these broadly coalesced into 3 identified themes, which were around careers, inclusion and recruitment. And from these 3 themes, we had 22 actions identified. And the next slide just summarises those actions. So I'm not proposing to go through all of the actions that are in there, but you can see broadly we have a careers awareness theme, and that is broadly being led by a partnership group called the D&G Careers Events Group. It's made up of representatives from key organisations developing young workforce in the Chamber, our own HR teams, and they've taken forward leadership of all those actions. Then the inclusion theme is supported through our local employability and skills partnership. The management office team there support those actions. And the third, which was broadly around recruitment, so that is led by a subgroup of the employability and skills partnership, the employer engagement partnership. If you look at the next slide, I've tried to summarise where we are with those actions, just using the kind of red, amber, green matrix, if you like. So those actions in red have not been taken forward, mainly due to the fact that they're already in existence or they've been taken forward by other groups. The actions in amber are underway, so a number of them have progressed quite well, but they're not systemic, they're not embedded, or there's still work to be done on those. And those in green are either underway or they're business as usual, and they're embedded in a systematic way. If I can ask you to bear with me, then I'd like to move on to the next slide and talk a little bit about the wider context so that I can set this into the kind of overarching work that's undertaken by our employability and skills partnership. So looking at if I can move on to the next slide, sorry. I'm not used to not controlling my own slides. That's what it is. It's a luxury. And my screen's updating now. Okay, so are we on the National Strategy for Economic Transformation? I'm not sure if my slides are up to date and my screen's a little bit behind.
I think we've just jumped forward one, Lynn, so
yeah.
That's it, gone back to it now.
That's it, perfect. I can only see half, for some reason I can only see half the slide, so I wasn't quite clear which slide we were on there. Thanks very much. So the employability and skills support generally and the employability and skills partnership specifically contribute to the National Strategy for Economic Transformation. 2 of the 5 overarching themes are the most relevant, that of the skilled workforce and a fairer, more equal society. There's a lot of different national policies which drive the work of the partnership, but the key ones for us just now are No One Left Behind and Best Start Bright Futures. These are focused on general employment support and child poverty, tackling child poverty through employability. For this coming year, the LEP has chosen to have a priority focus also on the policy which supports a fairer Scotland for disabled people. If we can move on, and I'll go swiftly through the next one, great. So I'm not going to belabour the local drivers. I think everybody around this table will be familiar with these, but the slide is in there for information really to demonstrate those links. And the next slide, similarly, a lot of information in here which I'm hoping to put in as background really. So the next slide just lists a little bit more of the national policy context for general background. There's quite a lot of information there, but specifically of relevance to the priorities for the employability partnership going forward. And looking back at the inclusion theme of this action plan, the action around reducing barriers to employment for disabled people out of the Fair Scotland for Disabled People Employment Action Plan. We're looking to support that action to seek to reduce by at least half the employment gap between disabled people and the rest of the working population. So that's one of our key priorities for this year as a LEP. If I'll skip very quickly through the next 3 slides. Again, I've put these in for information really, but the next slide, if we can move on. Okay, so these are the national drivers, the key policy drivers for employability, particularly around the Best Start Bright Futures. That's a significant level of investment for us this year. We haven't yet had confirmation of the funding, but the funding for child poverty through employability is equal to or even exceeds the general funding for employability support. And that's about seeking out and supporting parents into work and parents that are already in work to improve their their economic position through upskilling or increased training. The next slide, please. Again, this is mainly for information. This is around our key drivers. So the two significant policies that we work to are the No One Left Behind policy, which feeds directly into that National Strategy for Economic Transformation, and similarly Best Start Bright Futures, where we focus on collaborative working to integrate support for parents to get those progression in work and back into work. And again, the next slide. So moving on to look at what we do locally in terms of the Employability and Skills Action Plan, or the delivery plan. So our vision, which was set, our delivery plan runs from 22 to 2027. So the vision for that delivery plan was that by 2025, which is rapidly creeping up on us, that Dumfries and Galloway would have a collaborative, but more importantly, an effective and easily understood employability and skills system, which focused on person-centred positive outcomes and pathways into sustainable and fair work. So to do that, we have these objectives, which are about really providing the right support to in the right way at the right time, being data-driven, using local governance and making sure we work collaboratively together, to deliver to the standards which are set by the Scottish Government, and to do all of this whilst encouraging fair work and inclusive growth practices. So if we can move on to our next slide, which details our current priority groups. So this is for the year that's outgoing. So we've had these priority groups for the past year. We're about to review our priority groups again at the next, they'll be subject to a full and formal review at the next LEP meeting. But we're not anticipating that these will change significantly. Broadly, we are using a lot of data analysis, and we take that data to develop a SWOT analysis for the region and then focus those into the real priority groups for the investment that we are able to direct really through the Scottish Government No One Left Behind and Best Start Bright Futures funding and the People and Skills element of Shared Prosperity Fund. In advance of that, if we can move on to the next slide. So in advance of our formal review, we have already at the last meeting of the LEP agreed that we will take forward these priority groups. That's about the child poverty and the disability employment gap. So I wanted to just speak a little bit more about those two pieces of work that we've already undertaken. So we had a pilot this year in Stranraer. This used a service design based approach, and that's a people first approach. And we were looking at employability services using that 20-minute neighbourhood. So we recruited local community consultants. They were invited to participate and they all received training in service design. We then had our economic development analyst who has a lot of information. He was able to layer that information up. Using that data, we really enabled those community consultants to go out and knock on doors, because we had pinpointed down to street level those areas where the most need was, where people with parents, people with children would likely be the target group that we'd want to speak to. Once we'd done that, and a lot of pop-ups actually, and tackling through schools, through parent councils, we generated a whole heap of information. So the walls of the Millennium Centre were covered all the way around with information, which was then further analysed by the local community consultants. And they are now working with a lived experience panel who have their own funding, and they are directing and making the decisions on how that funding should be allocated in terms of tackling employability, parental employability in Stranraer. So that was a pilot which we undertook with support of the Dean Angus Service Design Academy. We're now agreed that the LEP will fund that to be rolled out in the other priority place areas across the region. In terms of the disability employment gap, Dumfries and Galloway has the worst employment gap in Scotland, so we are 32 of 32, so that's a clear need and a clear priority. The LEP has commissioned a bit of work to investigate that further. In fact, if we can skip on to the next slide, please. So we can commission some work by Jamie Rutherford, who is an expert in the disability employment field. And he did 2 pieces of work for us. He undertook an independent review. And following that review, it made some short-term recommendations for us to be enabled to tackle that employment gap straight away. Those commissions are in development now and should be out in the next couple of weeks. The next phase of that was looking at a longer-term strategy. That strategy was completed with a bit of consultation with our employability partnership partners. And we are going through a consultation process with that strategy just now, and we intend to launch it once that process has been completed. As part of that, I think the recommendations are on the next slide, actually. If we can move on to the next slide. Yeah. So the recommendations in there, including a big ask on the public sector employers in terms of being able to lead by example. So there's a big ask of public sectors. We're looking at bringing public sector as an employer to a round table to discuss what we can do collectively around that. And that obviously chimes with those themes 2 and 3, the inclusion and the recruitment theme of the Workforce Skills Action Plan. So in terms of linking this back to the Workforce Skills Action Plan, I think you can see that the themes are broadly progressing well. What we're looking to do now is to integrate the themes 2 and 3. So that's those themes about inclusion and recruitment into the work of the LEP, and that will be included in the next LEP delivery plan. The LEP, the Employability Partnership, being that place where the multi-agency partnership already has those relevant partners around the table to take that work forward. So that was a bit of a canter through. I'm really happy to take questions or provide any further information on any of that. Thanks very much.
Thank you, Lynn. If we can take the slides down, that's great. Okay, thank you very much for a comprehensive presentation, lots of detail in there, and let's have a conversation about it. And I've got questions already, so let's go to John Campbell.
Yep, thank you, Chair, and thanks for your presentation, Lynn. At the beginning, you mentioned housing and transport, in particular transport. I think you mentioned it about 3 or 4 times. But through the slides, I couldn't see anything through the local drivers, the national drivers, or the key policy drivers in the slides there. I mean, housing's in that sort of flowery diagram, however, but transport is equally just as important. We do have a fragile, transport network in the region at the moment. I'm just wondering, now that the young person's bus pass has been issued, has that actually improved situations? I'm not quite sure if we've got that information at hand. And the other thing was that are there any other means of that we can get transport incorporated? Like community transport, for example, car sharing, things like that. Have those sort of things been looked at as part of this action plan? Thanks, Lynn. Thanks, Chair.
Thank you, John. Over to you, Lynn.
Thanks very much. So housing, transport and childcare are the top 3 barriers that we always have within the employability service. It's not really within the remit of our action plan to tackle those, but we do work very closely with a number. So we work with the RSLs as much as we can. We work with community transport and indeed our own council transport team to look at that where we can. Particularly for a good example of that just now, so we're working with our council transport team to look at the shortage of PCV drivers. So where we can provide training and support to upskill people, for example. We have also we have a project which is currently on pause around community transport. So we do make those links in, but our remit is definitely about the training and upskilling of people to help reduce the bottlenecks, if you like. We've funded the Chamber recently to support a number of parents into HGV driving licences, PCV and all related driving licences. So the uptake in that's been quite good. But that obviously goes with the shortages. So we go with where the shortages are. Where the sector tells us there's no more shortages, we would stop doing that because we're seeking to address shortages. In terms of the bus pass, that has made a significant difference. We do fund young people and older people to travel. We give travel expenses where it's required. The issue around the bus pass is if there is no transport at the time of day where you need to get to work, the bus pass being there doesn't make any difference. You may have a bus pass, but there's no service, so you still can't use it. So we need there's a number of different options that we have to try for that. It's a significant issue.
Thanks very much, Lynn. Yeah, I'm encouraged with that response. Thanks, Chair.
Thanks, Lynn. Thanks, John. I've got Linda and then Dawn. Linda Dorwood first.
Thanks, Chair. Thanks, Lynn, for your report. Just a couple of questions. John's already, our Councillor Campbell's already asked the first question about transport, which has been answered. A couple of other ones is, the first question for me is, how do you propose to measure success? What does that look like? Because there's nothing really in there about that. So how would we measure success, and how would that be reported back to this board as an outcome? And I'm wondering if any thoughts being given at the summit to, has there been any thought being given to the fact that we're looking to grow our economy and we're looking to do that in terms of green energy? Has any thought been given with any synergy between that and training available locally or getting training in? Thank you.
Yeah.
Over to you, Lynn. Yes, thank you.
Thank you. Thanks, Councillor. So yes to both of those. So we have a shared measurement framework which we use with Scottish Government, which around employability we have a good number of indicators around success. So we measure, if you're talking about it depends whether we're talking about the Workforce Skills Action Plan or employability, so I'll talk about these separately. First of all, in terms of employability and skills, we measure outcomes. We measure people moving into positive destinations. So that's education, employment, training, volunteering, basically any positive destination. We also measure progression. We have a strategic skills pipeline, so people generally are placed in a pipeline from the stage of engagement through to the stage of in work. And we measure when people move along the pipeline in terms of their individual progression. We also measure, for financial reasons, we measure the return on investment in a certain way. And these are all measured on a quarterly basis and reported back to Scottish Government. In terms of the Workforce Skills Action Plan, there are no measures of success for that. We have been measuring, basically monitoring how just using the red, amber, green, how the indicators and the actions are being taken forward. What will happen if and when we move it into the LIT delivery plan, which is being refreshed in the next meeting, then KPIs will be associated with it through the LIT delivery plan. In terms of economic growth sectors, we're always looking at future skills, if you like, and green skills is one of those that's been on our agenda for some time. So we're part of a group, for example, looking at retrofit skills and how we might establish upskilling and training around retrofit. A way we often do that is through an intermediate labour market approach, which is not different to the Kickstart programme. That's where you take people who needs a bit of support. They get a job, a paid job for a limited period, 6 months. They also get job search and CV support, so the employability support, and they get mentoring. And at the end of that 6 month, then they're not dropped off. They would be supported until they get themselves into a job. So that kind of model fits well with those types of approaches, and that retrofit is an area that we're looking at the moment. We've also just recently had approval from the LEP to appoint an officer to look at the coordination of those future skills and the green skills, because it's quite a complex area. There's a number of different partners really and stakeholders in that. So the college, for example, the RSLs, the council, and all those different levers. So looking at having somebody to coordinate that and take that forward so that we can enable some pilots and some action to be taken for that area. Thank you.
Are you okay with that, Linda?
Yeah, thanks, Chair. Could I just add, Lynn? Okay, Lynn, thanks for that comprehensive summary. It was quite challenging questions. I appreciate that. So we have appointed somebody to look at taking forward the synergy with the green energy and skills. Is that person in post, or will they be in post fairly soon? I think it's quite an important thing for this region to have that on the radar. Thank you.
So the recruitment's just about to start for that post. So they should be in post as quickly as we can get them through the recruitment process within the next 2 months, I would say.
Okay, thank you very much.
Fantastic.
Thanks, Linda. Thanks, Lynn. Over to Dawn, and then I've got Andy McFarlane after that, and then Stephen Thompson. Dawn first.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you, Lynn, for your presentation. Really comprehensive. It's good to have sight of that here. Just a comment and 2 quick questions, if that's okay. Firstly, in terms of the action plan and the colour coding on that, this is just something that jumps out at me. There are a number of areas that are red, and you describe those as being taken forward elsewhere. But I think the reading of that, when you see a sea of reds, is that they're not progressing at all. So I think, you know, we just need to be conscious of how that might be interpreted, Lynn, in terms of the you know, that assessment of where we are on the action plan. So that's just a comment. In terms of my questions, my first one is in relation to the references to Fair Work. And I think I heard you say that the Fair Work is embedded. And I'm keen to understand how we determine whether Fair Work activity is embedded in Dumfries and Galloway. And we know that there are huge challenges in certain sectors. The work of the Fair Work Convention has flagged a number of particular challenges in, for example, social care and in construction, and they're just progressing an inquiry at the moment in relation to hospitality. So I'm just interested in how that, how the work related to Fair Work is progressing in D&G, and how we determine that that's fully embedded. And then my second question is just, you know, in relation to the final comments you made, really, around potential role of the public sector in taking a lead in a number of areas, and you know, the gap that we have in terms of employment in relation to disability was the example. And I'm just interested, and maybe Valerie might want to comment on this, is how do we hook that into the work on anchor organisations that's been led through the leadership team? You know, because we have a number of opportunities as public sector employers and public sector organisations to, you know, to really take these forward. And I'm wondering if we can hook that in as part of the anchor organisation work. So I'll pause there. Comment and 2 questions. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Just before you come in, Lynn, Dawn referenced the red areas on the action list, and there's one area question I wanted to just raise as well, which connects to that really, which was the development of the HR forum. It feels to me that if you've got a significant strategic challenge for the area, and one of those relates to trying to improve the perception of this area as a good place to live and work, and therefore help not just to maximise the number of people in the area that work, but also to draw people into the area from outside, that we ought to be maximising the contribution of collaborative work across those HR forums. So when you're responding to Dawn about how we assess those red areas and whether they're taking progress, could you also comment on that if possible, please? So I think there's 3 areas to comment on, if you don't mind me saying that. I think there's one about the red areas in the action plan, there's one about the Fair Work conversation, and then there's one about the public sector's obligations and whether they can be linked into the anchor institutions.
Thank you. So I'll try and work my way through those systematically. I'll take the red areas first. I think it's maybe an unfortunate colour coding. I think I'll undertake to review that. And behind this, we have a more robust explanation, which I can forward as well. The HR forum exists already within the region. We're advised that the HR forum is a thing that we don't need to establish because it already exists. What we could do, I guess, is make a link to that. Potentially, I haven't investigated that, but we were advised by HR colleagues that was already covered, so that was underway. And as part of our ongoing work around, for example, the disability employment gap, that's maybe one of the things that we have to think about. How do we engage with that HR forum in the same way that we need to look at how we can hook in the role of anchor organisations, or something about how we bring this all together, definitely within that. So if I can maybe take that role of the public sector first, then that's an area where I think perhaps a roundtable of senior HR people to look at that would be a good place to start, to identify those practical actions that we can take and to understand what's already happening, because there's always a danger with these things that you start inventing all sorts of new things, which is what happened a bit at the Workforce Skills Summit. You know, we came up with lots of great ideas and then people said, actually, that already happened. So there's maybe a bit of mapping and understanding what happens and how effective that is, definitely, before we come up with a new action plan. But certainly, in terms of the role of the public sector, we'd be seeking to link into anything else that we could. It's not about doing something new or additional, where this is about understanding how we can embed what we're doing and make it better. To go back to the role of Fair Work, I think I'm talking about Fair Work being embedded in the roles of the Employability and Skills Partnership. Certainly not talking about it being embedded across the region. That's not the case. We know that. Fair Work is embedded in terms of, for example, Fair Work conditionality within grants and any work that we do with employers. When we do employer engagement, we support employers to go through the Fair Work process and become Fair Work accredited if that's something they want to do. So it's about actually promoting and supporting employers and the Fair Work message through everything that we do. So in terms of embedded, it's embedded in the actions of all the work that is commissioned and supported by the Employability Partnership. It's part of our conditions in terms of those commissions and any grants that we provide. So yeah, I think that's the three. So the Fair Work, the role of the public sector and the HR forum. Have I covered those?
Dawn is satisfied with that answer. She's nodding, so that seems to be a good answer to that, comprehensive answer. Lynn, thank you very much for that. Before I move on to the other questions, I know that there was a suggestion that Valerie might want to contribute, and she did put her hand up. So, Val, do you want to come in on that anchor institution conversation?
Yeah, it was just to sort of confirm that in our LOIP action plan, we do actually have a specific action about CPP partners increasing those opportunities for priority groups to be, in volunteering or in partnerships. And I think we're at that stage now of really going, right, who's gonna lead that? And it fits very much with the Employability Partnership, but I think it's how we really get a focus on that and actually go, so to achieve that aim, what do we need to do, what's already in existence, because we don't want to reinvent the wheel. But I think, Dawn, it's a very important point that actually we need to be holding ourselves to account in terms of what we're doing in relation to that. And through the community planning senior leadership team, I think that's a really key area that we need to focus on and make sure that that happens. And Stephen and myself can link offline with Lynn, because it's really important we don't duplicate or set off a whole nother raft of actions that actually all just needs joined up and reported into this LOIP action plan process. So happy to take that away with Stephen and Lynn. Dawn.
Okay, thanks. And Dawn's nodding her head in agreement with that. Thank you very much. I've got Andy McFarlane, then Steve Thompson. Andy first.
Yeah, thank you, Chair, and thank you, Lynn, for your presentation. I'm going to move on to a less strategic, perhaps, point. You made mention of recruiting and helping with training for PSV for local transport. One of the things that we had in our manifesto was about trying to support mobility by getting people about. And one of the examples you gave was it's fine having a bus pass, but if the bus isn't there, so public transport doesn't always support you getting to where you need to be when you need to be there. One of the things that we had in our manifesto was about supporting people to learn how to drive. Is that something that you have considered? And if so, how would that be implemented in a sort of more practical way? Thanks.
Okay, Lynn.
Thank you. Yes, that's something that we already do as a partnership. So we have a driving lessons grant that clients can apply for, and all key workers and providers along the employability pipeline are aware of how to access that. It's something that we've done for a long time. So we support people in terms of their license, sometimes to get the license first, and then both the theory part and the practical part of driving lessons. There's a grant available for that already.
Super, thanks.
Okay, thanks, Lynn. And Stephen Thompson.
Yeah, thanks, Chair. It was, I suppose you've covered the point about the traffic light signals in terms of the red, yellow and green. I think that's been well covered. I think it was more around the commissioning. So, and forgive me for being remiss, but I haven't actually seen the halving Dumfries and Galloway's disability employment gap report. So I'd welcome being able to see that, if that's okay, if that could be circulated. And apologies if it has been already just sort of embedded within this presentation. But in terms of the commissioning itself, I'd be interested to know, if that's set out clearly based on those recommendations. I know we've got the recommendations on page, sort of the last page of it, in terms of those objectives, which includes a further commission. But in terms of how we monitor how effective whatever we've procured to deliver those objectives, I'd be interested to see how we're doing that, to know what impact we're having in terms of delivering on those objectives. So is that something that'll be reported back here, or will there be some way of monitoring performance, basically, in terms of delivering the objectives? And as I say, if I could get sight of that report as well, that'd be really helpful. I'm sure members of the CPPB would welcome that as well. Thank you.
Okay, Lynn.
Thank you. So in terms of the report, it hasn't been circulated yet. It's been just formally endorsed by the LEP recently. It's quite a hard-hitting report. So there was a bit of feedback with the consultant as well around the report. The commissions so there's two reports. There's a short-term report, what can we do right now? We've got a bad disability employment problem, what can we do right now? And then there's this second report, which is a longer-term report, what should we do over the longer term? So the second report is where the recommendations have come from. That's the longer term, more strategic part of that. The commissions that are going out just now are based on the short-term report, and the short-term report was very detailed. The commissions are based entirely on the recommendations made by the expert within the report. So those recommendations are that form the basis of the ITT. They will form the basis of the contract management based on the KPIs that have been set out there. So it's extremely clear, and there'll be good performance monitoring within that. The Employability Partnership has a partnership management office, and they are set up to contract manage these reports, and there'll be regular reporting and monitoring throughout that process. Thank you.
Can I just quickly come back, if that's okay?
Feel free to, Stephen, yeah.
Thanks, Nick. Yes, no, and I just wondered, so is it the partnership that will receive that, or will we, through this partnership board, I suppose, so the CPPB rather than the LEP, will we actually be able to see some of that, the distillation of that contract management, so we know what's working well and what we need to improve? Thank you.
Yes, absolutely. We can bring that back here. We will have those reports to the LEP, and we can bring any of those reports here. Also, what we're doing is creating a document on a quarterly basis, which we call our single source of truth. And we make sure that that document has all of our contract management, our KPIs and our reporting. And that's what we're using to give us consistent measurement across the piece, because these are long-term strategies. They take a long time to kick in. So we're trying to get that baseline and make sure that we're being consistent in how we're reporting to enable that proper performance management to happen.
That's great, thank you. And is that a sort of allusion to Pravda, as I said in the old days? But so the single source of truth, did you say?
Yes, single source of truth. That's our name for it. I don't know where it came from. It's just happened. It's not making any reference to anything.
Okay, thank you.
Thanks. And I've got a couple of questions. I think Alan wants to come in as well. Alan will be in a minute, but just a couple of questions from me. We hear a lot about the numbers of people who chose to become economically inactive as a consequence of the pandemic, and we have a significant number of working age adults who no longer work for what we appear to be work-life choices as well as health reasons. Do we get any intelligence from the work that's been done on some of the reasons and the circumstances for those people, and whether there's an opportunity to influence the decision for them to return back to work, if we're going to maximise the number of working age adults in the local area to get back into employment and support the economy? And the second question was, I was just wondering if any work had been done related to the armed forces, i.e. the people who leave the armed forces and return to the area. We know they're a particularly vulnerable group, and they don't often find themselves in employment, they can actually find themselves homeless. We did wonder in earlier conversations with the CPP about whether we should be proactive with the armed forces about people who are likely to be leaving so that we can make contact with them earlier. I don't know if that's featured in any of the conversations to date.
Thank you for those questions. So in terms of the economically inactive, we've done an extensive piece of research on that, and we actually have a commission out just now, which is around, it's called a condition management, and it's about supporting people back into work who have been very long-term unemployed. Long-term unemployed is one of our priority groups anyway. We're talking about the very long-term unemployed. It's interesting when you look at the analysis around the economically inactive level, there is a number of people who are economically inactive for what you might deem positive reasons, or reasonable, for a reasonable purpose. So the numbers can look quite significant, but when you drill down, they're maybe not as they are significant, but maybe not as significant as they first appear. The condition management programme, we have put that out to tender 3 times now, and we are really experiencing difficulty in finding a supplier to be able to support us with that. And that's, we have a Scottish Local Authority Economic Development Group where all 32 local authorities attend, and this is consistent across Scotland. So there's a huge demand for these type of services, and we simply don't seem to have the suppliers in the region. So we're working with procurement for a solution to that just now. In terms of armed forces have always been one of our groups that we support. We do have a number of organisations that we work with. There's an organisation called Salute My Job, which do a bit of that early intervention work. And we also have a couple of local organisations, particularly around HGV training and things like that, which kind of often lean into the skills that armed forces veterans have. It's not an area that we're currently prioritising at the LEP. It's just not one of our priority groups. We've had to make difficult decisions about our priority groups because we had a list of priority groups that really effectively meant that the priorities had no longer become priorities. So whilst they are a group we would actively support, they're not one of our priority groups. If that answers the question, I hope.
No, I can understand why you might need to prioritise. I suppose what might help me in the future would be some understanding of the numbers of those people that were involved. How many of our young people end up joining the armed forces, and on an annual basis, how many are likely to return out? Well, they may not return to D&G. That's one of the problems, I think. How many of them are likely to come out? I'm not saying that's your job, Lynn, but it'd be interesting to have some sense of that. I haven't got a clue, to be honest. I'd be better informed, would be helpful. I've got a question from Alan Webb, I think, to you, Lynn.
Thanks, Chair, and thank you, Lynn, for your presentation, and also to you and your colleagues for fast-tracking me through my induction through LEP and employability over the last few weeks, which has been very helpful. My question is around Best App Right Futures, and I suppose I focus through LEP on employability and barrier to employment for families with young children, and you've covered some of that in your presentation, but I suppose from a very practical basis on linking work on poverty and inequalities across the region. We have poverty and inequalities working in that partnership, 2 subgroups that focus on extreme poverty and one on child poverty. We have mitigating actions in our children's services plan about mitigating poverty. And I suppose at a time where we want to make the best use of all of our resources, I wonder on a very practical basis the links that could be made between all of those partnerships on how we generally address poverty, I guess, across our region to make sure that we're not blurring the lines and duplicating effort, number one, but also that families and children get a single experience from all of our work. So an engagement on employability, an engagement on children's services, an engagement on family support seems not quite the best way to use our resources. So a very practical question for you in terms of how does that work from you connect with the work of the other partnerships? And part one for the broader partnership, how do we make sure we're getting the best of all of our resources and investment? Thanks.
Okay, thanks. Lynn, you first, and I think there's a challenge for people around the table here as well to answer that in some part too. So, Lynn.
Yeah, I think thank you for that question. It's a great question. I think in terms of the linkages with the groups, we have at various levels linkages through the employability partnership. So we have members of the partnership and members of the partnership management office, and indeed members of the employability team who are on these groups. And I regularly have attended the Tackling Poverty and Inequalities overarching group to keep them up to date with the work that we're doing around tackling child poverty through employment. I also sit in the cost of living board in the council, so we're quite good at making those links. But I think the main point for me is the point you made about how people access those services and that continuity, because it's not a good service, I think, for people trying any service people trying to understand where to break in, if you like, how to access those services. And again, this is something that the Scottish Government have recognised is the same across all 32 local authorities. And part of the child poverty Best Start Bright Futures funding is a requirement for a local coordinator of child poverty through employability. So we have now appointed last November Kerry Monteith, who's probably quite well known to a lot of people, being a ward officer previously, as that child poverty coordinator, and she has a small team. So they're looking at that development. So they're looking at both how we develop commissions, how we provide services, but also how does that work systematically? How does that work? And they are the ones that are leading on that approach that we took in Stranraer, which is using the Scottish approach to service design. And that takes it from the client perspective, really from the client perspective. And those community consultants that went out and did the work for us were parents themselves. So they were parents speaking to parents. So I think that work is really innovative and exciting. And the potential for improvement through that work, I think, is really huge. Thanks.
Okay, are you happy with that, Alan?
I think yes, and the second part of my question is, you alluded as a wider partnership. How do we do that kind of work across the service so it looks consistent, but primarily that actually if we're getting investment for elsewhere into the region to address poverty, let's make the best use of it, I guess, is my point overall.
Thank you very much for that answer, Lynn. In terms of the second point Alan read, the way I read it, Alan, there's a question here about how we work across the partnership generally in terms of the reaping the benefits of the collaborative work we're doing. And I look to the leadership team to pull a lot of that together and ensure that we're doing that. But on a theme by theme basis, I guess we need to have some assurances that we are maximising that. We're not duplicating effort. We're not setting off initiatives that other partners aren't aware of, etc., etc. And it would feel that we could all have that conversation partly when we look at the LOIP work later that I know Val and Stephen will be reporting back on. When you look at their item 3.1, which we refer to later, it talks about the numbers of members that attend the leadership team and the CPP and the consistency. And one answer to joined up working would obviously be consistent membership, so that we have the same voices, the same people listening to the messages, and therefore they can do that triangulation of conversations between different initiatives and the partnership contributions. Does that make sense? So if there may be more to add when we get onto that section, I think. Okay, any other questions? Stephen.
Thanks, Lynn. We spoke about this in the development of the LOIP in terms of the alignment of the priority localised place-based areas and the LOIP as well, and that's good that that's aligned. And interested in the Stranraer pilot, and you mentioned about the lived experience, and yourself and your team contributed to the CLD progress visit in January, obviously, and the informal feedback was that lived experience, how that's being used across partners is looking really strong, and we'll bring the detail out of that when we get the final report. But I was just wondering, in terms of that pilot, has there been any lessons learned as well in terms of what works, what maybe hasn't worked, and how that's going to be fed into the other pilot areas or the other identified areas going forward? Thank you.
Thanks, Stephen. Yeah, that's a really great question too. There was a lot of lessons learned in the pilot, partially because it was a pilot and it was done in quite a short time scale. So there was a huge amount of lessons learned that came out of that. And because we were lucky enough to have Kerry involved in that, and it's her team that's taken it forward, then they've already taken those lessons learned. And so the next area we're working in is Kirkconnell and Kellohome, and they've already started. One of the big lessons learned was about earlier engagement. Get there earlier and start to know who to speak to in the community. And there's a huge element of pre-work to be done to make it more successful. I mean, it's a successful project, but it was definitely quite intense for those that were involved. So that early engagement has started already. But I'm not an expert on this. Kerry's definitely the expert on it. But there was a number of lessons learned, and I think it'll be an iterative process. When we move it. And that is part of service design, actually, is whatever you do, you iterate, you learn from it, and you improve it before you take it to the next area. We're intending to move it around our 5 priority areas. So we will take the learning that we've had from Stranraer to Kirkconnell and Kellohome. We'll take the combined learning from both of those to the next area, whichever that is, as identified by the data and agreed by the LEP. So it should be a constantly changing and refining process. That's built in, basically, to the model.
Okay, thank you. No more questions? Lynn, can I thank you very much for your presentation and for the time you spent with us today. I think we'll be seeing you again. You know that one of our key priorities is work and the workforce, clearly, and we've had struggles. All of our departments and partners are struggling to ensure we have an adequate workforce going forward. So anything we can do to support these initiatives is clearly a very high priority for us. So I suspect when we look at our forward look, we might well be asking you to come back, maybe with other partners as well, to continue this conversation. Okay, thank you very much, Lynn. Thanks for turning up today.
Thank you.
So for everybody to know, we've obviously received the presentation from Lynn. A number of comments and questions were raised. Now, where those are turned into specific actions, they'll be minuted and we'll make sure they're captured in the minutes of the next meeting. Okay, so things like the anchor institution relationships with this work, for example. Okay, thank you. On to our next item, which is the LOIP and the community planning model update from Stephen. And I know that Val and others are here to contribute to that conversation too. So, Stephen.
Thanks, Chair. Yes, and Valerie, I'll chip in as appropriate. So, the report you have in front of you chunks the various areas in terms of the implementation of the new model and also some of the projects that were taken forward. The first part, really on page 48, it was just a reflection from the senior leadership team, and obviously now Valerie's kindly agreed to chair that and supported by Scott Irvin from the Fire and Rescue Service as vice chair. So that's for the next sequence of meetings. And you know, Valerie coming in as well said quite a few reflections in terms of the last 6 months, and Nick alluded to it, that one of the challenges has been, because this was set up back in May, and in the majority there is regular attendance from the same partners, but sometimes the continuity is broken when there's different deputies that are appointed, and there sometimes you may be starting from scratch again in terms of building up that experience. So that's definitely affected momentum a little bit, and that's something that Valerie's keen to highlight as well. But maybe could I bring yourself in, Valerie, just in terms of your role as chair and some of those observations that you've made so far, I think would be helpful.
Yeah, no, thanks very much, Stephen. I mean, I think it is a new space that we're navigating in sort of community planning, senior leadership team, how it interacts with the board, how it becomes that kind of driving force to make sure that we deliver on those LOIP priority areas and on the LOIP action plan that we've agreed. But obviously there's a number of the strategic partnerships and how we all get our heads around all of this and really make sure that we don't duplicate work and that we can maximise resources. I think if we've got that continuity with the community planning senior leadership team with the same representatives there, I think sometimes it's helpful if they are different from the people that are on the board, so you've got different perspectives coming in. So I guess the ask would be, and it's extraordinarily difficult with the resource pressure that everybody has, but if we could get that continuity of representation, I think that would be really helpful in terms of us working together as a team and actually being able to work differently and support you as a board and delivery of those LOIP actions. So that would be a kind of key ask that we would have in relation to that. So really keen to take that forward as a first step, Nick.
Okay, thank you, Val. Do you want to carry on, Steve?
Okay, thank you. And we have, as part of the renewed arrangements, we have a dedicated place on the board for a representative from the leadership team to act as that conduit, and I think that's really important in the role that Valerie's playing today. And Valerie and the vice chair met with the co-chairs of the board last week as well, just to have that that shared understanding, and that was a really helpful meeting as well in terms of taking things forward in the future. So just some of the other areas in terms of the communications plan. There's definitely 4 out of the 6 key partners have now endorsed the LOIP at their decision-making processes, and I know NHS and SOS, that's due soon for consideration if not already. The website's been updated and has got obviously the new LOIP, but also the 5 localised data profiles, which are available for public view and use. And also, we had a short notice for the CLD progress visit back in January, but some anecdotal feedback at the moment is that certainly it was a very, very strong picture. And they also looked at the community planning model and how that's working, how the partnerships are working. So I'll be bringing back a report to the next meeting, which goes into more detail on some of the key issues. But overall, and a big thanks, and probably we'd like that minuted, to the range of community planning partners that stepped up late in December and early January to contribute to the progress visit inspection, if you like, because it wasn't easy with so many people being on holiday, and everybody stepped up. And the programme, the draft programme that we put out is available at the next item. So thank you from myself on that. I was also asked to present to the Poverty and Equalities Partnership, and again had a really positive discussion there just towards the end of January, and keen to go around all the partnerships and make those connections. So in terms of locality hubs, and we spoke about this at the last meeting, and obviously these are led through Third Sector, Dumfries and Galloway, but have representation from all the key community planning partners. So there had been a delay in the second workshop in terms of reaffirming the area-based role and the working arrangements, and we had a really, really positive session where there was 28 members from the localised teams, were split into the localised teams, and the session was facilitated by an external expert, and it was really vibrant, and that was to really reset, looking at the new LOIP, the priorities, but also how relationships are so important to community planning work, how in that area-based working the relationships are going to be key to making an impact going forward. And just at the bottom of page 49, you can see the key areas that were highlighted in terms of about trust, collaboration, care and compassion, etc., and feeling empowered at that local level to make those decisions, and that was bought into by the local officers working in the area. There was also a dedicated session on the importance of storytelling, which was really interesting in terms of how to better evidence the impact of the work on the ground and the different techniques and how to do that, and that really challenged quite a lot of the group and the members, but in a fun way, and everybody took a lot from the session. So that was a great grounding to launch that as part of the new arrangements, and I know Alan's bringing a report to the next senior leadership team to take that to the next level. So really positive there. Val's mentioned about the LOIP action plan. There's some very early progress that has just been updated within page 50 and 51, but still a lot to do, and keen to try, and we're looking at the best way to report this, possibly developing a scorecard with maybe milestones for some of these projects as an example. It's something that can be run and a bit more easier to maybe understand and track progress and see what's on track or what's not on track. And again, that's going to be built into the next leadership team on the 21st of March, just to take stock in the best way to do that and make sure we're taking forward the positive action. And again, in terms of the LOIP performance framework, there'll be a draft that will be presented to the leadership team and then back to the board in June. And as mentioned before, we've been doing a lot of work with Public Health Scotland, which has been really, really helpful. And there's been a mapping exercise done of all the available indicators that are out there, locally and nationally, and how those link back to the new 12 LOIP outcomes as well. And that'll need to be combined with case studies and other kind of local work in terms of how we want things to look going forward in terms of evidence that impact. So that's going well and on track. And the next piece of work is really looking at the locality planning side of things. And again, we mentioned about the areas that have been identified before. Public Health Scotland are doing a bit more detailed work on the Upper Nithsdale area and looking at even drilling down into more finite detail to help with localised planning. So that work should be completed at the end of the week, at the end of next week. And then we're looking to get a timeline to get that pilot area up and running. Finally, just as an appendix, it came out at the time and didn't quite allow it to come to the board, but there's the new place and wellbeing outcomes, which have been launched through the improvement service. there was an opportunity to provide feedback as part of the consultation, and it was agreed we would do that on a community plan and partner basis, and that was submitted last week, not in time to include it in the papers here today, but that's went back, and really that will help also inform the localised place-based working in terms of how these indicators can link back in and really drill down into the local details. So really quite exciting. These new indicators, and also will really help support the local development plan and the work linked to that going forward. And I've had a discussion with Shona McCoy around that, who's also really excited, and also linking back to the place plan and partnership as well. So that's the main updates for this quarter. I'm happy to take any questions. Thank you.
Thank you, Stephen. And before I get into questions, let's set the tone for the conversation regarding the attendance at CPLST and the CPP in 3.11. And I think it does relate to what Alan Webb said earlier about consistency of integration and collaboration across the partnerships. I know that in my tenure as co-chair of the CPP and working collaboratively with Stephen Thompson when he was co-chair, and more lately with Gail McGregor, we've been very, very keen to see the CPP as a fundamental building block of partnership working in the area. And it's very difficult it's very easy during very difficult times, budgetary, etc., and capacity, to dismiss the partnership work because it takes time, and to puddle down and get on with your own internal business in your own partnerships. And I think Gail and myself, as the current co-chairs, would like to express our support for the collaborative working in the partnership agenda, and that it's the only way to get through this difficulty and to maximise the contributions that all the partners can bring, and not cause disruption and chaos to our partners by actions which are not well thought through and understood by the partners in general. We know that each partner will have to make difficult choices, and that will have an impact on partners, but partners should be aware of those, and potentially wherever as possible should be involved in the conversations too. So one of the challenges that, and first of all, let's thank Val and Scott for taking on the leadership responsibility of the CPSLT as well. But one of the challenges for people to consider whether their officers are attending on a consistent basis, so that the themes and the stories that emerge from those conversations become consistent and resonate in terms of the needs of the population and what we're trying to do here. And clearly when different people attend on a number of bases, that story gets lost, and therefore the consistency of planning can get lost. Does that make sense? Okay, so that challenge can be addressed outside of this meeting, clearly. The same for the CPP. We do get very consistent representation at the CPP, but there's been consistent churn of membership through to retirements and losses over the years as well. But we just need to try and keep that membership as consistent as possible too. Everybody okay with that? Right, so anybody wish to contribute to the conversation about the LOIP, the community planning model, and the progress update that's been presented? Val.
Yeah, if it's okay to come in just to mention about the performance framework as well for LOIP and community planning, and it kind of links back to what Councillor Thompson was asking for in terms of the LEP and you know, kind of level of detail, and I just wondered about that tension there is about wanting a lot of detail, but actually where this board should actually be focusing on in sort of strategic outcomes and you know, kind of short, medium and longer term outcomes. And if we get the performance framework right, we shouldn't have to have the depth of detail of all the reports coming in to this forum, because it becomes overwhelming in terms of the volume of papers. So I think there's something about making sure that there's like the key indicators are reported, and we keep a strategic focus in relation to this, and really clearly demonstrate, you know, the contributions things are making to development. So there'll be something about working with Lynn and picking up relevant ones from the employability partnership. But I suppose it's just a bit of a challenge about the, you know, the kind of level of detail. And one of the other things, Nick, that we were kind of keen to look at was as an SLT was about the operating framework and, you know, the kind of frequency of things that are reporting to this group, so that you've actually got more attention to spend on, you know, updates rather than multiple updates kind of coming as well. So I guess it was just that ask to, can we look at this to maybe try and streamline so you've got greater focus on things, if the board were happy with that.
Thank you very much, Val. Yeah, Dawn wants to come in on that, I think.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. Thank you, Valerie, and very supportive of that, of your comments there about the need for strategic focus and real clarity around short, medium, long-term impact. And I really welcome in the report in relation to the performance framework, the reference to qualitative measures as well as the kind of the indicators, because certainly in the short term we might be more dependent on some of the kind of more case study type of use of impact, because it's going to be really difficult in the short term to determine impact of some of the activity that will only ever have long-term outcome. I'm just interested, you've attached to the report the improvement service paper, which is really, really interesting. And I'm just wondering, as part of the development of the performance management framework, where there's an opportunity to seek the involvement of the improvement service in terms of, a bit of challenge, support, and cross-referencing with other performance frameworks. The Council is certainly working with the improvement service around the performance management framework for our council plan that was agreed last year, and that will come forward to full council for consideration. And I'm just wondering whether there might be benefit in those conversations with the improvement service around the approach to the performance management framework for the LOIP as well. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Dawn. Val, do you want to come back in?
Yeah, it was John. Dawn, just to give some reassurance, we have had a conversation with the individual taking forward the council improvement plan, the council performance framework as well, to look at, so there's not duplication and work can be built on there. I think very happy to connect our colleagues in Public Health Scotland that are supporting this with our local consultant, Chris Allen. Very happy to connect into the improvement service as well, and just make sure that we get something that's really, really robust. So yeah, I'm very happy to do that, make that link.
Thanks, Val. While we're on the performance framework, my comment would be that clearly, and it's referenced in the document, an outcome focus is important, but we're looking at 10-year horizons. Some of those outcomes aren't going to be easy to measure. So it's important that we understand what it is we're measuring in terms of the outcomes. But I do tend to think that a lot of the reports that go certainly to statutory bodies tend to be input focused. So we talk a lot about the money we're investing and the numbers of people we have working on a particular project. And I'm not quite sure we ever really understand the best value that brings in terms of the net contribution, and whether the net gain is greater than numbers of people and the money that's been put into it. So if there's some sort of way of assessing whether the project benefits are delivered as we expect them to be, and whether they truly do lead to a delivery of the longer term outcomes as well, I think that would be helpful in the performance framework. Val, you're smiling. Do you want to come back in on that?
Happy to take that away, Nick, but that potentially could become an industry in itself to try and work that through. But leave that with us, and we'll take that challenge and see if that can be achieved.
Okay, well, as to strategic level, I can see some evidence of that already. We've got the updates later on from all the different partners, and you can already see that they're starting to be presented against the three key themes of the LOIP and our strategic objectives, which gets a sense that the partners are starting to think through what is it we're doing that's relevant to the strategic outcomes that we're trying to deliver. So I think that's a starting point. And I think when we go back to your reporting challenge, what should we report back to CPP, etc. I guess any report that comes to us should up front be able to identify what it is that's contributing to the LOIP and to the strategic objectives. If not, then why is it coming to the partnership meeting? Because that's what brings us together for the interest of those things. I think John wanted to come. John Duggan.
Yeah, thanks very much. just as we're discussing this and performance framework, I think obviously very clear points that we want to try and include in our reporting and how we move forward. One of my questions is that how do we compare to other community planning partnership boards? Are we making sure that we're gauging where they're at and we're not just focusing on what we do? Obviously that is our key priority, but it would be really good to know how we rate and how we compare to other partners across the country and what we can maybe learn from them.
Steve, do you want to come in on that? Yeah.
Thanks, John. Really helpful question. As part of the original benchmarking work, we had a look at what has been reported, a snapshot, if you like. I think the only consistent tool that all community planning partners are bought into is the improvement service one, the community planning outcome profile, and that's what has been used in the past and can be used as a comparison area. It's fair to say, certainly from the examples I've looked at, it's a very mixed picture across the board. There's no one really best practice out there. Everybody's approaching it slightly differently. It's something probably the National Community Planning Board, I think in the past they've tried to get some consistency, but have not quite got there. But just some reassurance that we have looked at what's out there and shared those as examples to help inform what we want to do and evidence locally. So thank you.
Valerie.
Yeah, I think if you look at some of those longer term strategic measures, they will be available in a way that you can benchmark, John. It's when you get down into maybe some of the kind of the medium and the shorter term ones where there's like different programs operating that it can be difficult to benchmark against. But again, by maybe linking into, the conversations with Public Health Scotland and the Improvement Service who do tend to develop these things nationally, we can maybe help inform future development of benchmarking tools going forward. So again, happy to pick that up in those conversations.
Thank you, Val. There's implied position here as well, isn't it, about our strategic progress related to the CPP areas, about whether the CPP makes a difference. And I know that within the NHS Board Chairs group, we've often commented that CPP seem to be developed differently in different partners, and the commitment from the partners, I think, is higher here. There are some good CPPs, I'm being told, around the country. I think the CPP commitment strategically here is high relative to some of the others. Whether the outcomes are then delivered is another question, though, so I think that's what we'll have to see as the years march by, I guess. Val, Stephen, I've got one comment about the locality hubs work that's taking place. In the 6 themes that emerged from your session with them, one on trusting relationships, one on feeling empowered. That sense to me that there may have been an underlying issue there about large versus small-scale planning processes, centralisation versus localised, all those sorts of conversations. Am I right in picking up that might have been the tone to the conversations? Stephen?
I think that's a fair comment, Nick. The locality hubs are still quite early in their their development, and I think it's going back to looking at operating protocols and what they can do, what they can't do, and I think that was maybe felt as a bit of a barrier, and to be more free in the local area, and you've got the permission from the next level up, if you like, to go out there and do what you don't need to keep reporting back or asking the questions, and just that trust to get on and do it, given that it's the local staff from all the partners that run those, and giving those staff the trust to get out there. They know their community better than anyone. That's where that was coming from.
Okay. So local staff potentially, as long as they feel empowered to get on with action, they also potentially should have to be encouraged to identify where they think actions they're developing might have a greater impact if they were to work more collaboratively across the system too, and they should flag that up to us so that we can develop broader initiatives across the region. Yeah.
Yeah. If I just come back in that, Nick. What we're trying to do is, and it's going to be discussed at the senior leadership team, because there's not really been any reports or updates that have went to the leadership team on the work of the locality hubs, so they're not as visible as it should be. So there's going to be a 6-month basis, like a highlights report, some of examples across the region of the impact the locality hubs have made to help raise the profile and understanding amongst the leadership team, but also, you know, broader there and incorporating in community newsletters, for example, in terms of the work and really getting out there. And that was part of the storytelling, you know, part of the development session to give some upskilling to staff and tease those out. And I say that was a challenge, but it was really enjoyable at the same time. So that's the direction we want to go in.
Okay, thank you very much, Stephen. And Valerie.
Yeah, it was just to say, I think it's an area as a senior leadership team we're really keen to understand in a bit more detail the roles of the hubs and the opportunities that are there, because that really is an opportunity to hear from very closely in communities directly how things are going and what they feel needs to change and what needs supported by us. So I think it's going to be an evolving relationship, Nick, going forward, but one we're really keen to support. And I know Alan, I can't see Alan because of the screen, but I know Alan's really keen to support the locality hub model and the potential of that as well. So he might have some thoughts on it too.
Thank you, Alan. Do you want to come in?
Yeah, I think just reflecting on your points here, I think the feedback that I've had is similar in terms of a real keenness of people kind of in the front line in their communities to be able to have a say. I think an important aspect of the reporting element that's outlined in the paper here is also that those locality hubs feel that they've got some point of escalation to directly influence what happens through the SLT, which is an important aspect of it. What I would share with partners is going into the new year, we are already orientating our organisation to invest in locality hubs, both in our part that we can play as part of the partnership, but the role we have on bringing third sector and community voice into that space. So I would kindly remind partners that we are invested and committed to it. So it's a model that we are invested in to make sure that it absolutely works. So the update that our team will bring in terms of next SLT will be progress to date, and also setting out a view of where the hubs themselves think the kind of sense of direction is going and what's needed from the board and SLT. So I think that will come back through the reporting cycle too.
Thank you very much, Alan. So really positive confirmation for the model that's developing across the systems, across the partners in delivering the LOIP. Any final conversations or comments anybody should make? Yep, come in.
I really just wanted to reinforce Valerie's point about streamlining the process of reporting. I think reporting, when you use reporting to reflect on what you've done, to look at your performance indicators and to get a sense of progress, that's a really useful thing. If reporting becomes what you do instead of the doing, then I think it does become more difficult, and I think we need to try and get the balance right, particularly, and I think also, I mean, I don't know if it's just me, but reading through the papers here, I start to lose the will to live because I can't see the wood for the trees in terms of, if somebody asks me, what is the Community Planning Partnership Board achieved in the papers today, I might struggle to answer that because there's just so much so anything that kind of streamline that approach for the benefit of the staff doing the work on the ground, but I guess also for those of us to say, how have we done it? And just a final point, how do the locality hubs understand what the strategic direction is? Because they're on the ground doing the business and having conversations. Do they have any sense of what the priorities and whether that's translating? So, for example, the employability priorities, do they see those priorities translating in their locality area? Do they see the focus on transition for disabled children, for example? Do they see that as a strategy, and can they call on the strategy and presumably the additional funding or the additional pieces of work to allow them to reflect in their own area whether that's working or not?
That's a very good conversation, very good contribution, and thank you for that. And I guess what resonates for me is we produced a LOIP, it's a document, but how live is that document? How well is it understood by the people that we trust to get involved in it and then start to deliver at a local level? And that tension between central versus local delivery then becomes very significant, doesn't it? Because whilst local bodies might well have their own view of their own priorities for their own communities, they should be taking on board the assessed priorities from the LOIP and trying to identify whether their own priorities fit or align within those LOIP, without being dictated to, of course. They will have local choice, but they should be reflecting on the choices we've made as strategic leaders on what we think the region needs. And so we have the 3 strategic themes, but under these are about 9 or 10 key action areas, including things like employability. And I guess for me, it would be to see how the local hubs, the local programmes of work interface with the LOIP and the strategic vision we have to make sure that's live and living and real. The other thing that perhaps it's worth bringing in here, and you can comment if you wish to, Gail and myself met with Val and Steve and Scott last week as referred to, and the conversation about what should be reported to the CPP came up. And Gail and myself's position, which you can challenge because you are CPP members, was that really we want to see reports that reflect on the delivery of those three key strategic ambitions. So the health and well-being of the population, the work available for the people and its fairness, and the last one was, just escaped me. Your mind goes blank at these times, doesn't it? And I've written it down about 18 times today. Place, of course it is, right. So I think we'd be looking to the leadership team to tell us how we could simplify that reporting process as long as the report reflects those strategic ambitions, and that we should be challenged not to bring things to the CPP that don't have significant things to say about the delivery of those strategic ambitions. Would that make sense? And I know a lot of bodies might think they have to report to a joint body of the council, local authority and partners, etc. But there are other ways of doing that, not necessarily through the CPP. So if we're going to simplify the reporting, I think that's a good challenge. And to respond to your specific challenge about the papers in front of us, as I said earlier, I think I'm seeing a shift towards a greater focus on those three strategic ambitions in the reporting of all the different partners. Maybe we'll get a more significant shift in that direction going forward. And interesting, I think it was Lynn Burgess's report that was the most significantly orientated in that direction. We ought to thank her for that, because she's, I think, setting the example for how other partners should contribute. Come in, Steve. Yes, please.
Thanks, Chair. Joe, just on your latter point about the locality hubs and what we did at the end of the workshop, we did share the LOIP priorities, etc. But post that meeting, myself and Claire Brown had a chat, and we've shared the schedule of the strategic partnership reporting to the leadership team. It's on a sequence, so there's like 2 partnerships are considered on a rotational basis. Claire shared those with the locality hubs, so they can start to think, knowing that, if there's something linked to children's services or employability, the leadership team are going to be looking at that in March or May, and they could start to maybe filter that through, so they are feeling the joy. So we did do a wee bit of work around that, so thank you.
Okay, thank you, Steve, very helpful. Any final contributions on that section? Okay, thank you. Again, can I thank Val Scott particularly for taking some responsibility and leadership of the CPLST, and for Stephen and Val for helping to coordinate the work that comes up to this partnership programme as well. So we have considered the learning points and reflections from the CPLST in terms of attendance and the learning and time it takes to get on up to speed with the expectations of your partnership responsibilities. We've looked at the communications plan and noted that. We've considered the approach to developing the LOIP performance framework, and I think some of those actions will be taken forward and we'll capture them in the minutes. And then we've noted the timescales for the locality plans as described. Thank you very much. Right, the next item on the agenda is the updates, key strategic updates. So over to yourself, Stephen.
Thanks, Chair. Just a few things, and just to consider as well that Val spoke, Nick spoke about the reporting, and at the moment, we do quarterly reporting across the 12 plans, and again, it might be then in the future that we maybe only do 6 monthly reporting and only focus on maybe 6 at each meeting, just so it can have a closer focus rather than being overwhelmed with the number of partnerships. But that's something keen to get feedback on. But again, Nick's given the leadership team permission to look at that at the next meeting as well and come up with some suggestions. So really, the information on page 66, 67 is just a brief overview of the key points that are contained. We mentioned about the change of date for the development day for the ADP. Appendix 2 has progress report on disabled children with complex care needs. Appendix 3 has community justice outcome improvement plan. Appendix 4, as I mentioned earlier, it was just a sample for interest of what inspectors viewed as part of the progress visit. And again, just happy to take any feedback on that. Also noting about Poverty and Equalities Partnership, and that Nick Hopkins will be coming to the next meeting. And the LDP, and I mentioned I'd met with Shona McCoy, and there is going to be community conversations happening shortly linked to that LDB development programme. So at the end of those conversations, Shona's keen to come here, share those, but also discuss how the LOIP can help support and inform how the LDP looks going forward. So that was the main things, and we'd picked out, and it was a request at the last meeting, a focus on housing and some of the housing challenges. So we wanted to really have a focus on that at this item, and Jamie's here to help support that along with Alan Glasgow. And there's also two colleagues from SOS that I think are on the call as well to chip in. So happy to move on to that if you feel that's right, Chair.
Yeah, Val, you've got your hand up first.
Yeah, it was just before we moved on to the strategic housing partnership in terms of the local development plan. There was a comment about it was getting difficult to get infrastructure data from health and social care, and it was just to say that I've been in touch with one of the planning colleagues and I'm hopefully resolving that. So it was just to give assurance about that. And I think just really to highlight, I don't think we can underestimate how important the local development plan is in terms of that aspiration around place and places that support health and well-being, our work and environment as well. So I do think that's a really, really important piece of work and an important focus for community planning. And I think it would be really great if Shona could come to the SLT to talk about how we really maximise that. And think it would be really important for community planning going forward to be well cited on that, and the evidence and what's coming out of that in terms of planning would be my reflections. Nick, thank you.
Okay, thanks, Val. I'm happy to be directed in that direction by yourselves and Scott, etc. So we'll take that forward. So let's make sure we give enough time for our housing colleagues to give us an update on the challenges they're facing. So Alan Glasgow would like to welcome to the session, Jamie Little to the session. I believe we have Gary Legg and Isabel Conway on the call as well. So Alan, are you going to open up the conversation? Jamie, okay.
Yeah, thanks, Chair, and thanks to the board for inviting me along today to speak about housing. Hopefully the report presented in front of you gives a reasonable summary of some of the challenges that are being faced. We're obviously at a critical stage in terms of development of our housing need and demand assessment and our local housing strategy, and obviously the role of the board is critical in the development of that strategy, while it sets out the Council's strategic objectives for housing and reaffirms our place as strategic housing authority. It's critical that we do so in partnership with many of the key stakeholder organisations within the region. I'm sure members of the board will be very familiar with some of the challenges that are facing housing. They're multidimensional at the moment. We are under severe pressure as a council to deliver homelessness and housing options services. The development of new homes is becoming ever more challenging. Turnover of social rented accommodation is at an all-time low. But we do, and it was good to see in Lynn Burgess's reflections earlier about some of the strong partnerships that are in place within this region. We do have very strong partnership working arrangements with Wheatley Homes South, having recently signed a strategic agreement. One of the key elements of that agreement is 50% of all of their allocations go to our homelessness and housing options service, and that's something we work very closely with Wheatley as the main RSL in the area. The position though that's being experienced locally, and hopefully you've noted in the report, is something that's being experienced across the country, across Scotland, probably across the UK. There is a national push to try and resolve some of the issues around housing. 3 local authorities now have declared housing emergencies and have put action plans in place to try and resolve some of the particular challenges. So the position here is a struggle and it's very hard, but obviously, as mentioned, there is that push nationally. One of the additional challenges has been the cut which was confirmed within the Scottish Budget on Tuesday to the Affordable Housing Supply Programme. We have spent a number of years building up a very healthy and vibrant supply programme, and we're obviously keen to continue that. The cut is going to be an additional challenge, but I feel that with our strong working relationships, we're probably in a reasonable position to mitigate that. I'll probably just bring in Isabel Conway, first of all, who I can see is online. Isabel is the lead officer from South Scotland Enterprise in the work of the Strategic Action Group for Housing. Russell Griggs does chair that group, and that is a subgroup of the Regional Economic Partnership. So I'll bring Isabel in just to speak a little bit about that work.
Thanks, Jamie, and apologies from Russell, who couldn't make it today, but is very supportive of this work. So Russell has been chairing with partners, including with the Council's Strategic Action Group on Housing. That has been underway for the last 9 months approximately, and been engaged in some evidence finding and engagement exercise, spoken to over 50 organisations, and coming together around an action plan. Potentially, we know there's some really tricky operating contexts, so not underestimating by any means some of the challenges, particularly around the funding for affordable housing in the year ahead. But some good news, some optimism, particularly from some of our local builders who are really ambitious about getting involved in more development, but really looking for support to how they can do that. We've got a really innovative RSL community in the south of Scotland who are doing some really interesting things and really thinking ahead and innovatively within the funding that they have. So some opportunities we think there to do some partnership working to develop more housing. Looking more widely, there are other issues they've been looking at around planning, around private rental sector, and around community housing, and again identifying some potential actions which the group is looking to bring to the Regional Economic Partnership meeting in March, so in a couple of weeks' time, to get their feedback and responses before taking that forward into an action plan later in the spring. And I'll pause there, but happy to answer any questions on that.
Okay, back to Jamie, I think.
Yeah, thanks, Chair. I'll just bring in Alan just to summarise. Alan's, as many of you know, Managing Director of the largest RSL in the south of Scotland, so is well placed to speak to the particular pressures on the social housing sector.
Thanks, Jamie. I would probably just echo some of Jamie's initial points. It has been very challenging in terms of ourselves and the homeless numbers. We work very closely with the council, our colleagues, to try and meet that demand, but it's an ever challenging landscape over the years and seems to be challenging year on year. Another challenge for us, and Jamie touched on it, is our turnover's at less than 8%. So when Wheatley Home Sales came in, some of the properties at that point probably hadn't been invested in for over 20 years, but we've spent a significant amount of money investing in our new homes, because that's as important to our customers as building new properties. And with that, though, the demand for the properties, we've got over 3,000 people across Homes for D&G waiting for a property, and it brings its own significant challenges. I think a challenge that's probably year on year started to creep in is the ability to adapt our properties. We know our colleagues at the council face the same challenge, but we see a very limited budget for Scottish Government in terms of what we get and actually what we need year on year, and that in particular has been a challenge in trying to keep and working with our health and social care partnership colleagues and trying to make sure that we've got the right homes for our customers. But with some of the challenges in terms of the new building particular, has also created opportunities. We've built 89 properties down at Curry's Yard, and people have maybe seen it in their travels. It's a development we're very proud of, but that's also helped drive some of the local economy. So where we can't always bring builders into the region, we certainly have used some of that local workforce, and that created almost 2.3 million just in that one development alone. So again, there's a model there. We've been speaking to colleagues, Lynn in particular, about we've got big ambitions along with the council and about Lochside. So what does that look like in the future? We've got some of our customers in the most deprived areas. How do we get that training in, working with Dumfries and Galloway College? And I think with all these challenges, there's always opportunities. But what I think is important is the collaboration piece in terms of how we work across each other. Resources, regardless of how big we are never over-resourced. But we have the right people in the right places to deliver. We're very ambitious about a programme in the south, and I'm not just in this case, Jamie's here, but very fortunate to have
Jamie and the colleagues across the council, because he makes it easier to deliver when you've got folk on the same page, and I think we do have that. We do have some challenges getting to some communities in terms of trying to get some of that perception of what social housing looks like. There is a stigma to it. So how do we work with local communities to show that it's a value to that village or town rather than being something they don't want? And we'll always be at the forefront of engaging with communities. We have customer voice panels. We've engaged with thousands of customers over the last year about our services, what looks good, what doesn't look good, how do we change it. Even when we do new build programmes, we make sure customers are at the heart of what we do. And that's not just a slogan or about a jargon, that's generally how we try and do it. We don't always get it right, but I think we always try and put the needs of our customers first, and I think employability housing is, and we've heard the themes today, is so important in having that working relationship. Thanks.
Yep, thanks, Chair. I'm happy to take any questions.
Okay, thank you, Jamie. Thank you, Isabel. I don't know if Gary was on the call in the end, and also thank you, Alan. Gary's not on the call, okay. Any questions on the housing challenges? I've got Linda Dorwood in first.
Thank you, Chair. Thanks for the report, and thanks, Alan, for some additional comments there. One of the things that hasn't been mentioned, and I think it's quite important to look at, is, housing for how do we put this, more mature citizens, and those with additional needs, and where this factors in. I know that in the proposed Heath Hall development that some thought has been given to this, but more and more now in terms of culture and where we're going, we're moving from care home provision to care at home provision, which seems to be much more popular with a lot of our elderly citizens, elderly residents. And is there any provision in the strategy? Wasn't mentioned, Isabel, in terms of the SOSI working group, but is there any provision or any thought being given to this? Because it seems to be what we might have an increasing need for in the future. And so it's about future proofing as well. Thank you.
Thanks. Isabel, do you want to come in on that one?
Yeah, I can do. It's one of the areas the group set out to look at. We've not yet got into that in great detail, but it's potentially going to be one of the areas we want to do some more research on. We know there's a lot of demand. We see that not just in terms of social housing, but actually for a lot of the private developments. A lot of the private development that's happening in the south is actually larger properties that are being bought by people who are not economically active, moving into the area from outside. So it's clearly a growing dimension. In some cases that is being developed in a way that's suitable for kind of care in the longer term, but in other places it's not. So it's creating an additional need that we need to think about. So it's certainly something the group wants to take away and do some more research around thinking about.
Okay, thank you. And clearly, if we do some predictive numbers of the numbers of people that we're expecting to be cared for at home increasingly, and that the length of time they're likely to be there, that will help to factor into the supports you need to ensure those houses are adapted appropriately. Yeah. Jane?
Thanks, Chair. Yeah, just in terms of the question there, we've recently been carrying out some housing need and demand assessment work in Dumfries and Galloway, and a recent event was held specifically focused on specialist provision, which would cover the inclusion of homes for older people. And I think it was a key message that came out. We'll obviously come back with a more formal report in terms of how need and demand assessment to the council, but a key message was that piece around the demand for older people's accommodation. And Alan mentioned in his comments about the need for aids and adaptations as well to homes to allow people to live independently for as long as possible. I know obviously within the reports we do refer to attendance at the key strategic meetings, particularly the Strategic Housing Forum. And I would just like to say that the Adult Health and Social Care Partnership turned up to that meeting in good numbers. It was a very strong, a very good discussion as well. And we've taken some key points away from that discussion that we will obviously be feeding into our local housing strategy and our local development plan. I'm not sure if I've made it clear in the report, but the housing need and demand assessment is the key evidence base for the local housing strategy and the local development plan. But I'm going to bring Alan in as well, just to speak a little bit about later living accommodation that they provide, and particularly some of the developments that we hope will be coming forward in the near future.
Thanks, Jamie. And just to kind of follow on for Jamie, we have a product which is almost, it's called Living Well, where it is for kind of help some of the more age profile customers. It's a house that can be adapted. It's within a community. It has breakout rooms, but also has independent living. Folk don't want to do in that, and we're probably looking to try and establish that over the next year or so. And again, that's not something I've built in a South context, but it's something that's very, very popular across our other subsidiaries within Wheatley Group, which goes right across Scotland. So I think we're very aware in terms of the kind of local landscape, in terms of the age profile, and I think, as Jamie just touched on, the house needs demand assessment. It's been really good. It's been a really good piece of work. Still a lot of work to do in terms of how we do that and how we deliver on that, but I think that would be really key about in terms of, and again I go back to, it's having the right places, the right homes, the right places, which is so important. It's not just about the numbers, it's about the people behind that, and I think we're aligned on that.
I don't know if this is tangential to the issue, but I'm aware of a project that the Health Board's coordinating at the moment over in Stranraer, which relates to access to bits of digital kit that people can have at home that identifies how active they are within their home environment, you know, whether they're accessing the fridges, accessing going up and down the stairs, getting out of beds and things like that. It's like internal monitors that the people obviously consent to having, but it's enabling them to stay in an accommodation that otherwise may not be available to them because they may otherwise have gone into formal care. So I think some of those digital type solutions might also be worth considering in terms of supporting active living within the home environment. Alan?
Yeah, that's very popular. We've used that in other subsidiaries within the group, and it's actually it's been developed as pilots in some parts, and some of the technology is actually fantastic in terms of helping support people to stay in the house a wee bit longer, and also assurance for their families, because it ties in through apps, etc. So no, I think that's something we definitely keep on the radar.
And in the principle of not duplicating, then it might be worth, outside this meeting, if we just let you know who's leading that project for us, and you can work out whether it's synchronised with what you're trying to achieve. Okay. Any other questions to Jamie or colleagues? Linda.
Thanks, Nick. Just to expand on what you spoke about, the technology in housing and kitting out houses, there's actually a fantastic space in Dumfries and Galway College kitted out for training individuals. It's kitted out as a future house of the future. And I think that'd be a really interesting place for anybody who doesn't know much about the use of technology, which I certainly didn't, in caring for our elderly residents. It's actually a fantastic place to go and see that. It's also training individuals to work with that, which is fantastic. Cheers.
Thank you, Linda. Okay. Any questions? Okay, can we thank you for your report? Sorry. Oh, sorry, Dawn, didn't see you there.
I've got comments about other aspects of the plans and strategies report, not the housing. Thank you.
Let's just complete the housing conversation first, then we'll move to the other reports. Any final conversations on housing? If not, can I thank Jamie, Alan, and Isabel as well for their contributions to that conversation. Okay, thank you. Let's go back through the key strategic plans then. So let's first of all start with Alcohol and Drugs Partnership. Any comments? It may be go straight to you, Dawn, and you identify which ones you want to contribute to. It might be easier that way.
Yeah, it's more of an overarching comment and couple of questions, if I may. And I appreciate that there are, the range of plans and strategies that have been identified as contributing to the LOIP. And I really welcome the comments in 3.3 in the report, which is about streamlining the reporting. Going back to Joe's earlier comments about, the extent of reporting that we see and the need to be really crisp and clear in why things are coming forward. So my comment really is to support that, the intent in 3.3, but to ask two things really. One is, does the agreement of the LOIP prompt the need for any of these plans and strategies to be refocused, reviewed and reprioritised? So that's my first question. And secondly, in terms of the potential for streamlining, I think it would be really helpful when we see these reports come forward in whatever frequency that is agreed, that we're just really clear about the role of that strategy in delivering on our 3 outcomes within our LOIP. Because otherwise we'll get lost in so much detail that I think there's a tendency to lose the focus that we're trying to have through this Community Planning Partnership Board. So a comment of support around 3.3 and then 2 questions, if I may, and that's general. I don't have any further questions to ask on any of the other reports. Thanks.
Okay, thank you, Dawn. I mean, you speak to my heart there in terms of the, you've often heard me say in this meeting, let's not retrofit our plans to make sure we can find areas that tick off bits of our LOIP. And I think the challenge there is to say to each of our strategic partners, can you reassess your strategic plan and make sure that it's hitting the LOIP intentions, and particularly those 3 strategic ambitions that we've got. I think that's what you're asking us to do, Dawn. And are all the partners agreeable they should do that? Yeah. So for each of the authors of these strategic plans, one of the bits of feedback then is for them, and it looks like they're starting to do that already by the way they're referencing it, but that aspect of ensuring that they reassess how they're trying to achieve their strategic intents against the LOIP, I think is one that we should ask them to do. And clearly they may well have actions they have to deliver for other reasons, regulatory and or other, but they should be able to justify their relationship with the LOIP. Let's stop then, go to Val.
Yeah, no, I think what's really important as well is, sorry, getting a lot of feedback, is to understand where some of these partnerships already report anyway, and the purpose of them actually reporting to CPP is something that we can reflect on and take away. And it is an action that we've got in the LOIP action plan, is to look at these delivery plans and really understand that contribution to the LOIP. And I know, Stephen, you've started some of that work in progress. So I think absolutely, I think it might take us a while to get there in terms of how we streamline this and how we do it, but certainly very happy to start on that journey, and we can bring something back, updating and where we've got to, obviously at the next planning board meeting.
Okay, thanks, Stephen. Do you want to add to that?
Just to support Valerie's comments, happy to do a bit more detailed, look at this. In terms of the overview and developing the LOIP, some of these were the priority, partnerships and plans that were identified before, and then we reviewed it. We brought in alcohol, drugs partnership, etc. Probably around half have statutory context in terms of we are required to have them, and also the timelines. Is very. Well, it's not consistent. For example, the CLD plan, it's due a new 3-year, round of redevelopment very shortly. So, just the time and the frequency. I know that in terms of the community justice one, for example, so the lead officer for that has considered the LOIP outcomes as part of the development of that. So, we're trying to keep the communication going and making sure that the timing's right in terms of reflecting on the new LOIP and building that into the key plans. But there is the key question about streamlining and rationalisation as well. And again, we can have a chat about that through the leadership team and see where we can get to with that.
Okay. John Duggan.
Yeah, thank you. Fully supportive of looking at how we can streamline reports coming back to Community Planning Partnership Board. At a previous meeting, I think it was one of the elected members talked about how the papers are available for the public to look at, to read and to follow online. Acronyms, I'm looking at one from the education one on 2.1.4, the CSSAPP. I think we just need to maybe make sure that we explain just to us, but to the public what that actually means.
I agree with completely. Yeah, yes. So the challenge is for authors just to be aware of the people who are going to be reading this, and do they really understand the anachronisms that are being used? And likely they're not going to understand them. So good point.
Because potentially we're wanting to engage more people to engage in the community planning partnership process.
Yeah, good point, John. Thank you very much. Okay, so Dawn's challenge was, can we have partners just assess their strategic plans and their reports and just check that they're tailored specifically to the needs of the LOIP and that they can streamline their reporting in relation to the LOIP strategic objectives. And then additionally, John's making sure that as we do that piece of work, we make sure that the people who are supposed to have an engagement with this work, i.e. the public, can understand the language we're using in them. Everybody content with that? Anybody else want to comment on any other strategic updates? Great. Okay, let's move on to the next item. I think we're almost exactly on time at the moment. The business briefings. Over to yourself, Steve.
Okay. Thank you, Chair. So just 3 items to bring to your attention. The first one is through the NHS Localised Working Group, which myself and Valerie are involved in. It was brought as a suggestion that the development of the next adult strategic needs assessment could be considered to be done as a broader community planning partnership project rather than purely NHS, given the cross interest in terms of the various plans and partnerships and the usefulness of all of the information. So that was considered at the last senior leadership team, and in principle partners agreed that that would be a good way forward in terms of bringing together the key data intelligence officers within each organisation to work on this as a joint project going forward. The second one is the development of the physical activity strategy, which has came to the Community Planning Partnership, I think it was a couple of years ago, but it's now really ramped up in terms of the development work. There's 2 workshops. I think one was held this week actually, and a further one to come, and certainly significant impact in terms of health and well-being within our outcomes, for example, and helping addressing inequalities as well. So there's a keenness to keep a close eye on the work, get buy-in from the partnership, and see how we can bring that closer to the family of partnerships and plans. And finally, just to bring to your attention, and many of you will maybe know this, but there was there's an independent review of CLD ongoing at the moment. It was announced quite at short notice, and the consultation period only has lasted for a 4-week window. And the key thing is that the traditional strands of CLD in terms of adult learning, youth work and community development, it is not considering the community development part. It's purely looking at that pathway and skills contribution in terms of adult learning, youth work, how that aligns with employability, education, etc. So, as you can imagine, nationally there's been a significant number of engagement sessions and open consultation, and the council have fed in, CLD partnership have fed into that process. But the outcome of the review could have significant implications for how CLD looks, even the term CLD, and where that might go. So there is quite a lot of apprehension as well nationally how this might pan out. So the outcome of the review, the national review, is due in June, and it is quite tricky because the next CLD plan needs to be published in September. So I know through CLD national bodies they've written to the government to say, is there going to be a pause in that plan or an extension? Because if you don't know the outcome until June, which will have a significant implication on developing a new plan, but I don't think there's been an answer back in that just yet. So all local authorities and partners are in the same boat with this, and definitely keeping a close eye on it. So that was the 3 main items for this session's brief. I'm happy to take any questions. Thank you.
Anybody got any questions to Stephen on that? Valerie. You're mute at the moment, Val.
Apologies. It was to highlight the strategic needs assessment document. I think there's what's clear today is there's been lots of work already done in terms of the housing needs assessment and the local development plan, and actually we need to make sure these connect up and join, and that we use evidence that's already there rather than duplicating work. So I think that's already kind of an advantage I can see of being here and seeing connecting up. some of these conversations, and it was just to also say I was at the workshop for the systems approach to physical activity, and a lot of underpinning things came up about transport, accessible transport to get people to places, connecting to places. Active travel was a big area that came up as well. So a lot of things that we've talked about and other strategies and plans all connected to the physical activity one as well. So I think it's going to be really important that we kind of do build up those connects in those areas.
Okay, thanks, Val. Any other questions or points, clarity? Okay, I fully support the development of the joint needs assessment in a more partnership orientation. So I thank you for that recommendation from the CPSLT. Everybody else seems to be in agreement with that, i.e. they're not challenging it through questions. We note the development of the physical activity strategy for Dumfries and Galley, which was very helpful too. And we note the concerns raised about the speed of the independent review of the community learning development process and whether it's actually supporting an understanding of the impact of that on development of communities too. So that obviously can be fed back up nationally when we get the opportunity to do so. Any other comments? Great, okay, thank you. And a final item, which I did try to advertise earlier, that I would like some people to just a little bit of thinking about. Items for review by the CTLSD and then also the CPP at future. Are there any particular items that people are aware of that might add to our understanding of the impact of our strategic vision, the likelihood of delivering it, and whether it's resonating within our communities? Anybody got any thoughts on that? And clearly, as Stephen said, it'd be helpful if we can get some understanding what should go to the leadership team first so that they're prepped and developing their thinking on it before it coming to the CPP for an undeveloped conversation. Stephen Thompson.
Yeah, thanks, Chair. I mean, it's probably worth mentioning since the Council's, recently agreed its budget, and within that is some support for community transport. Now, this has been a regular subject at Community Planning Partnership Board, and everybody is able to mouth support for that, but not necessarily demonstrate support for that in terms of, and we've had various presentations over the years. This has been a long-running thing, so I don't want to exhaust the people here today, but, what are we doing about that, really? Because it has to be a sort of team effort, and I'm aware that the Council's put money into it, but nobody else really, despite indications that they would be supportive. So it's just about how can we meaningfully take things that we all seem to agree on forward. Thank you.
Thank you, Stephen. I think we noted earlier that SOCI's just made a decision just of last week, I think, to put some funds towards the community transport developments. And I think the NHS Board's Endowment Committee is considering some of those issues as well. So there's a potential for a tripartite funding process. But I think you're right, Stephen. It might be helpful now that we've had those confirmations of funding that we get some understanding of how that will be taken forward, and we can start to map progress against that. Alan and then Valerie.
Thanks, and just in response perhaps to Councillor Thompson's question, the proposal, I guess, that came across around that funding investment, I think my understanding has been to community planning at some point, and it's been a long-standing conversation. Now, once we have confirmation and kind of final confirmation that all the fund is in place, then I propose I probably bring back a paper to remind community planning partners exactly what's involved in the new 3-year development plan, which is around developing a region-wide social enterprise around community transport, and some of the work that we're already doing with transport colleagues in the council and with Special Trans colleagues in terms of trying to align all of that work. So the proposal will be I'm happy to bring something back once the funding is confirmed, just to make sure everyone's on the same page about what the next 3 years of activity looks like.
Thanks, Alan. And Val?
Yeah, it was just to confirm again, the community transport focus is in the LOIP action plan. So, and as Alan said, there'll be proposal has been worked up, it's going to be further developed, but the funding has been agreed now by the 3 partners that was asked for. So for that 3-year period. So I think that's a really positive place to be in, and I think everybody is contributing to it. So I think that's something to be celebrated in these difficult times.
Thanks, Val. Stephen, you want to come back in?
Yeah, no, absolutely. Well, hooray. So I wasn't actually aware of that. I know Susie was looking at something, but I think to have that confirmation today is great. So I'm glad I asked because I didn't know. So forgive my ignorance, but that's really good news. And I think we should celebrate that. Thank you.
Okay, we're all raising a glass of water to celebrate, Stephen, okay? Maybe there's a key theme there. We know that under the 3 objectives, there's, I think, 9 specific key actions, including things like digital, things like community transport. And I would guess that we would expect that the main theme of the agenda items for both the leadership team and for ourselves would be to focusing on those 9 actions and trying to understand how we're delivering against them. So that should feed into the CPP. So we'll take guidance from Val and Scott now on the frequency and timetabling of updates on those, depending on where progress is being made. And I think Val's made a point elsewhere that if we have too frequent a reporting, it's not possible to capture the progress that's being made. And we need to give the team sufficient time to make progress before we expect them to write significant lengthy reports on progress. So let's make sure that we don't overburden the teams on the frequency of reporting, but that it does fit into our strategic timescales. Okay? I certainly valued the conversation we had earlier about work and workforce, and I think we've identified that as a key challenge to all organisations in the Dumfries and Galloway area, particularly because of our demographic time bomb. So I would expect that we have a significant conversation about workforce going forward, and maybe that becomes a regular, annualised sort of thematic conversation in my view, but other people might have different views. And then the final thing, which I mentioned quite early this morning when we referenced this item might come up, was despite the conversations about things like CPP, CTLSDs, local hubs, district council processes, etc., I still find it hard to understand how they all work together. What's the infrastructure that brings this planning process together that makes sure that we understand our net contribution to the overall challenges? So who is it and how do they interface? Now, that might be very simple for people who are in the middle of that all the time. Steve probably could give me a demonstration and an essay on that tomorrow. But I find it hard to get my head around. And I know that when we had the conversation about the change in membership for the CTLSD and the CPP, it does take some time to get your head around all the different structures and processes that are taking place and what they're delivering. So maybe if we could have, maybe not a meeting, but a workshop process at some point that helps us just get a bit more educated on some of those things. I don't know if everybody else agrees, but I just still find it very difficult. People are nodding, yeah. Okay. Anybody else want to add to that? Linda, and then Andy's put a thumbs up, so that resonated with him. That's good. Linda Dorwood.
Thank you, Chair. Appreciate the comments on workforce. It's extremely important for the survival of Dumfries and Galloway going forward that we have a workforce that's responsive to industry and also to staff the public sector here. Absolutely essential. That's dependent on a number of factors, and one of those is housing, appropriate housing. So can I add housing to something we need to focus on? I appreciate the report this morning. It's absolutely fantastic. But from that, there are a number of issues that we still need to sort of find out more about. And I know that the rep work will be useful to come back to here, but I think it's something that should be kept on the top of our agenda as well, because it's something that's, if not a crisis, is fastly becoming one. Thanks, Chair.
Okay, thank you. Any final contributions? No, so we'll capture those, we'll feed them back to Val and Scott, and then they can plan accordingly. And then if anything else comes to mind by the CPP membership, please let them know and they can build it into their thinking. Okay, so that's the last substantive item on the agenda. It would be remiss of me as chair of the group not to note that one of our most significant contributors to both the leadership group and the CPP over nearly 12 years, I guess, is Mr. Geoffrey Ace, who is Jeff Ace, who is the Chief Executive of NHS D&G up until the 31st of March. So this is his last meeting of the CPP, and I'd like to thank him formally on behalf of the CPP and its membership for your contributions over the years to the partnership work. Jeff, I don't know if you wish to comment.
It's very kind of you, Nick. I think this meeting, as you say, has been a number of years with a number of key contributors around the table. there's a mixture of optimism and frustration, I think. I think our lofty goals are always laudable. I think there is huge willingness for us to work together as a partnership. I think your point about clarifying exactly what we are going to achieve in measurable periods of time, we sometimes lose track of. And I think it's best of luck going forward. I really hope we can this can continue to thrive as a partnership that delivers for the people of Dumfries and Galloway. And I've never doubted the attitude and approach of people around the table from the various organisations all wishing to come together. I think it's that focus on deliverables we really need to emphasise going forward. Thanks very much, Nick.
Thank you, Jeff. And just so that everybody's aware, we did have a successful recruitment to a replacement Chief Exec, Julie White, who most people will know. She's been the Chief Operating Officer of the Health and Social Care Partnership and has been the author of the Health and Social Care Partnership reports to this group. She will be the Chief Exec as of the 1st of April, and she's already in a transition process with Jeff so that she can take up that. And she's keen to get involved in the CPP work and support Val also from the Health Board in that work. Okay, any final comments? Can I thank everybody for their contribution today? Thank you for coming along. Thanks to those on Teams as well for their contributions. And if the public are listening, then I hope you continue to engage in the work we're trying to achieve and give us feedback on whether we're being successful in that. Thank you very much. See you again soon.
Thanks, Chair.